Designers and Builders, where design meets construction. We explore groundbreaking trends and talk to the pros reshaping our spaces. For your dream home, workspace, or just great design inspiration, subscribe to Designers and Builders.
Hey, welcome to today's brand new episode of Designers and Builders. I'm your host, Alyssa Olson, and we're welcoming Jaya Kader, founder and principal of KZ Architecture based out of Miami today. How are you doing, Jaya?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here with you, Alyssa. Well, I don't know if a lot of people know that I am originally from Costa Rica. I grew up in Costa Rica in Pura Vida land, and then I came to the United States to go to college, and I ended up staying for grad school and ended up staying my entire adult life here. But in 2020, right before COVID, I had an experience in Costa Rica where I felt that the land was calling me back to regenerate myself. And it was to the dot, like 40 years after I came to this country. So it was really interesting because it was almost like the land called me back after I had been able to go through this whole 40-year journey in the United States to question my gender conditioning of growing up in a Jewish home in Costa Rica and in a very Catholic patriarchal double system. And this country allowed me to sort of transcend that conditioning, and then I was able to come back as my full self, not as the conditioned woman that had been raised in a culture that was very, very patriarchal.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, that's such a powerful story, and
Yes.
that is
In and of itself. Yes.
for sure.
Yes. But Costa Rica was a great place to regenerate my being, and I welcomed every opportunity to participate in workshops about emotional literacy, healing. I did 2 yoga teacher trainings in Costa Rica. Costa Rica is a magnet for consciousness, for yoginis, for ecological enthusiasts. And I felt that very much the land embraced me in this path to becoming fully embodied in regeneration.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, it's do you feel like I don't know, I feel like that's just like such your thing. You're like the queen of like regenerative design and it comes from your personal story?
Uh, I think so. I feel there was a lot of my unconscious that was very deeply connected to Mother Earth through growing up in an environment where you were always surrounded by nature and by mountains, and the Pura Vida mentality of a place that is deeply rooted in practices that are beyond the neoliberal capitalistic system. And it was wonderful to be able to go there at this sort of breakthrough moment in my life and participate in so many experiences that were very rooted in the land.
For sure. And it's interesting as someone who's visited a couple of times
Yes.
in the most fortunate of ways, it's what really stands out is not only the Pura Vida lifestyle, but the symbiotic relationships across all things in nature. Like everything's dependent upon everything else. And it's such a magical spot on the planet.
Yes. Yes. And I also feel that there's something about the culture of Costa Rica because it hasn't had an army since 1948. And so even though people are very humble, the country decided to invest in education rather than the military apparatus and in preservation. And I feel that there's something very magical to experience firsthand a culture that has grown up without that fear of a military machine. There's museum for peace in Costa Rica that I visited, and what really resonated with me was this monument where they meant there's a quote, I can't remember by whom, but it says, "Blessed is the Costa Rican mother that when she has a son, she knows that he will never be a soldier." And what that does to the psychology of a place where mothers or children grow up with the freedom that there's nobody that has to go into the military machine. It's very wholesome. It creates a culture that grows up in freedom from that.
Absolutely. That's so powerful, and not to have that kind of ghost energy of this thing that's probably inevitable in one's lifetime, and that's
Yes.
just not a part of it at all.
Yes. Yes. And that's why it's a Pura Vida land, I believe. It's, I mean, many contributors is definitely this magnet for regenerative communities, for people that want to go there and explore new paradigms for being with each other, for being with the land. There's so many communities emerging there that are truly alternative
Mhm.
to the systems that we know.
Yeah, and are you in your architecture practice, are you working on some of those in Costa Rica?
Well, it's interesting because back in 2021, I worked with Walter on a transformational community, and that's how I got started working with Walter. And then I also bought land in a regenerative community there called Alegría back in 2020, actually, because I visited this community. I went to the founders retreat before there was any development going there. And that was a beautiful learning experience. And then also, I have friends that I have supported in their vision for regenerative communities in the South. And it's been a really enriching experience to be engaged with the country of my birth at those levels.
Yeah, for sure, what an honor. I mean, you get to give to a place that offered you so much.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and having all those incredible collaborations, and I know Walter Meyer of Local Office and Landscape and Urban Design out of New York. How did you 2 meet? Like, how do you meet your
Oh,
collaborators in this space?
that's a beautiful story because in 2020 I was part of our alumni council at the GSD, and a group of colleagues, all of a sudden we couldn't meet in person. You know, we used to meet twice a year, and then there was COVID and nobody could travel. So we would meet on Zoom, and with a number of colleagues from the council, we decided to launch this initiative, Design Impact, which involved Zoom panels about how design can be a vehicle for transformation. And because of my passion for sustainability, my colleagues held me to the task of curating the panels on sustainability. And when I started doing my research and curating these panels, everything led to regeneration. And that's how I got to invite uh, an Indigenous leader to my panels, Bill Reed, who's the CEO of the Regenesis Institute, Carol Sanford, who is the architect of regenerative thought, really, and then regenerative practitioners like Walter and circular economists and people that were involved with regenerative agriculture. So these panels were my greatest school, my my initial school on regenerative practices. And then part of my role as curator was to meet with all the speakers and to explore their stories and how they could best focus their presentation. And Walter was one of them, as a regenerative planner that he is. And he was talking to me about the work that he does. And then I think at some point I asked about his ancestry, and he told me that he was half indigenous, and his mother was from an indigenous ancestry in Colombia. And I said to him, wow, that is so revealing, because that's why you do what you do, because it's in your DNA, because it's in your it's who you are, and that's why you do what you do. And he nearly broke in tears because he had not really come to terms with that. I think that we live in a culture where people of indigenous ancestry are oftentimes kind of, they feel that it's best to hide that ancestry because it's been almost shamed by our culture. And for him to acknowledge that moment where he got to celebrate his ancestry as the greatest asset in his purpose, in the work that he does in the world, was a very beautiful moment. And then since then, we felt very connected and we stayed in touch and we became friends. And I invited him to participate in this project, which was to make a transformational community in a place called Las Delicias in a little bit south of Nosara. And it was led by this transformational coach, Lindsay Sukornick. And I helped her put together a team to bring that vision. Since then, the project didn't go through. There was a partner, and it doesn't matter why, but we got to experience working together for a regenerative vision. So it was a very beautiful process. And then ever since, I've been brainstorming on ways to bring him on board to projects that are for sustainability, for regeneration. And recently we collaborated in a project for a sustainable developer named Salva, which is the one where we met for Sunshine Grove. And I was very happy to come full circle and be able to see him in action again. So
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a small world in our
yes.
design community. And especially, the idea of regenerative design, which I'd like to get into, it's such a broad reaching
Yes.
concept.
Yes.
And the way that Walter describes it so beautifully is, sustainability, which for 20 years has been a real hot word, probably overly greenwashed, but also heavily embedded in people's practices now. But he describes that as kind of the what, and regenerative design is the how, and this more four-dimensional take with time, over the course of time. And I'd love to, just for the audience who isn't familiar with regenerative design, how would you best describe it?
Well, it's interesting you say that because for me, regeneration is more of a philosophical field that can be applied to any project, to life, to ourselves. It's a very holistic concept, in which is why I've really come to embrace it so fully. And for me, it wasn't so much about the what or the how, but it's about the why. And as a regenerative practitioner, we come to the realization that the systems that we've inherited must be flawed, and that all the problems that we encounter in the world at the intersection of health, equity, climate change, governance, they're not really the problems, but they're the symptoms. They're the symptoms of a greater problem, which is systemic, which is the conditioning that we've all been nourished into as to how things ought to be and what our relationship to the greater world and and the natural world is, and to each other. And what I truly embrace about the regenerative system is that it's very holistic. I feel like I always lived a dual existence. On one hand, I was a mother and wife and a member of a very deeply rooted Jewish community. And on the other hand, I was an architect, and those worlds could never meet. So when I was in one world, I would always minimize the other. And it's not a very coherent way to go through the world. With regeneration, I feel that it allows me to bring together all aspects of myself, be it personal life, be it work, and all experience through that lens of regeneration. And it allows us to stop the compartmentalization in our lives, especially as women. We've had to, I mean, on the one hand, I was living sort of the gender conditioning life of patriarchy and the roles that we are called to play through the collective unconscious of the female archetypes that we're meant to play. And as an architect, and trained in the United States and very much, through American Institute of Architect practices, I had to be in my masculine. So in both worlds, my feminine was very repressed. On the one hand, the repressed feminine that of gender role playing, and on the other hand, you have to be a man to be able to really make it in this very masculine fields. And regeneration really allows us to be authentic and to integrate all aspects of life as the sort of higher selves that we are meant to be.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Thank you for that. Such a beautiful description. And it's funny. I feel like at a surface level, if you're like, "Oh, I'm an architect," not even in like a Seinfeld way of like, "Oh, I'm an architect," but that's just like the label and kind of the face. But there's so much more to your work, and it's not just this practice of typologies of buildings. There's so much more foundationally going on there.
So back to the why. So that the realization that if we're in any of these professions, we're in service to a system that is not only flawed but breaking because it's unsustainable. And with regenerative practices, when you start really thinking about the why, do I want to be in service? Do I want to continue to be in service to these systems, or do I want to use my design skills that I've acquired over decades of operating as an architect to designing the possibility, at least, for different systems, for shifting the paradigm? And this question of why, it really informs everything that you want to dedicate to, everything that you feel that is worthy of you spending the energy, and you realize that you no longer want to be subservient to systems that are not serving, first of all, us, second of all, our planet, third of all living beings, including humanity. And so you become very discerning as to what you want to get involved with, spend your energy in. So it's a big shift to mastering the what or the how of what to do, to starting with the why. And it's interesting because, I mean, in 2017, I mean, how I came to Regeneration, and I was always very passionate about sustainability. And as a woman architect, I'm not alone with this. I recently gave a talk to the AIA, chapter of Women in Architecture. And the name of the talk was Women in Architecture, Equity of Legacy. And even though I honor all of these women that in the last 100 years have been able to break through in fields that were inaccessible to us as women, it's very important that we ponder upon, we formed all these groups: women in architecture, women in real estate, women in all the fields. Why do we have to make these groups? I mean, there isn't groups of men in architecture or men in real estate, because we found the deficiencies, because we weren't looked at. We were not really valued in everything that we bring to the table. And I I feel that in sustainability, so it's interesting. So the talk was about women in architecture, equity or legacy. So do we want to continue to fight for equity into a system that hasn't really served us or the world? Or do we want to harness the potential of what we've already contributed to be able to be in service to a better system? And I found that with all the efforts of all these groups of women in architecture, Today, if you look at the statistics, only 10% of world leadership in architecture is female. However, when you go to sustainable design, there's 63% of leadership in sustainable design that is female. So already we are bringing our intuitive knowledge about what is important to us. And we've assumed roles in a field that was relatively new within the profession, but we've been able to truly make a difference. So in regenerative thinking, it's all about harnessing potential. You know, if it's a project, you really study the site and you explore what is wanting to emerge from this place. It's a living system. What is the potential that is already here, as opposed to I'm an architect and I'm a hero and I know, you know, I have these ideas that are generated in my head and I can simply impose them on this land. Instead, how do I co-create with the living system that is already there? And at the end of the day, I feel that that is the task or the mission of the regenerative movement, is how do we become more in tune, more aware of the living systems that are there before we come up with our great ideas? And how do we co-create with it, as opposed to imposing purely mental human constructs on something that is already a living, thriving system?
Yeah. That's so powerful. I mean, your purpose in your design is in your embedded in your process and embedded in place and context.
Absolutely.
That's part of the response. That's a dialogue with
Yes.
place and flows
Yes.
and systems.
Yes. And for me, it was intuitive how I came to embrace sustainable practices, because I remember when LEED first came about and I immediately became a LEED accredited practitioner, but there wasn't even a LEED for homes. And in my practice for many years, I was mostly doing homes, luxury homes. And there's a lot of strategies that were just intuitive to me. This is Florida. I want the indoors and the outdoors to be intricately connected. I want to have natural light everywhere. I want to stay away from all these toxicity in construction. It was a lot of it was very intuitive. And when I did when I became a LEED accredited practitioner, it was great to kind of find the formula to bring to awareness all these things that I was practicing intuitively. And then I'm very grateful to that path, to that journey as in a design field as an architect, because from sustainability, it brought me to regeneration. And from regeneration, I realized that the first thing that I needed to regenerate really was myself. It's interesting because, again, intuitively, back in 2017, I felt very strongly that, wow, you know, as an architect, I'm really serving 0.0001% of the population, and design and beauty should be a right because it brings so much dignity to people. It shouldn't just be a privilege. So I went on this journey to do all these projects for impact. I started with traveling to Africa because a friend that was involved in leadership in Liberia invited me to help him create the vision for a school as a transformational catalyst. And then it continued with a competition that I did for the UN and the World Bank for resilient housing. And lo and behold, I was very surprised, but our team was one of the winners. And that took me on this journey to go to all of these UN and World Bank conferences around the world. It was so revealing and life-changing because I was coming from architecture and going to all these conferences that were very self-serving. And all of a sudden, I remember operating in this bubble of design and beauty and abundance, and being cognizant that there are problems in the world, but what am I going to do? And then all of a sudden, you go to these conferences and you meet armies of people that are truly trying to make a difference in the world. And I learned all about the 17 sustainable development goals of the UN. And it was very transformational. And then I ventured to do a peace pavilion for an NGO that removes mines from war-torn places. And what I realized is that none of these projects were getting built because it's almost like design is the last piece of the puzzle. If you're not first focusing on the why and how the system works, it's almost like you have to have that in place before you engage in design. Otherwise, you're going to use your design skills to keep sustaining what is unsustainable. So, and after I did all these projects in 2020 is when when COVID hit, and I had just been to Costa Rica and had this, epiphany that I should be in this country, which is a leader in preservation and sustainable practices. And I'm in Miami, trying to, row against the current to make luxury homes sustainable. Like I did the first lead home in Miami, but how truly sustainable are luxury homes? And as the homes kept getting bigger and bigger, I started to feel more and more the disconnect. And then that experience, and then coming fully into to embrace regenerative practices, I realized that the first thing that I had to do was to regenerate myself. And like I said, Costa Rica was an amazing playground to do that. And what do I mean by that? I guess there's a quote by Rumi, which I love, that says, when I was young, I wanted to change the world. No, when I was young, I was clever and I wanted to change the world. Now I am wise and I'm changing myself, because in regenerative philosophy, we understand that the work starts with us looking within and understanding what is broken within us, not by virtue of what we've done so much, but by virtue of the systems that have brought us into being, and what has not really been aligned, what has been broken, and to repair it so that we could truly be of service from a place of coherence.
Yeah, that's so incredible. Just valuing the transformational over the transactional. I feel like we're in a field where the easiest thing you can do is go down a traditional path, maybe get a corporate job or whatever it might be, right? And kind of go against your own values because in the system, that's the priority, right? Like you must have a job, you must contribute to society in this way.
Yes.
But I feel like, and maybe I feel like COVID really just cracked open our profession, broadly speaking, like, do you feel like that was the case for you too? Like, did that give you space to understand your own internal alignments?
Uh, abs- I mean, it was definitely a catalyst, because I remember having this space that I never had in my life. I raised 4 children. I built an architectural studio from the ground up, and I was always in that performance mode. And then all of a sudden, COVID hit, and I remember having this space where I didn't have to run to my studio every morning. And it gave me a lot of time for contemplating what that meant, that freedom. Wow. I don't have to run to a million places at the same time and to pay attention to all of these things. I had that space. And I remember everybody wishing that their lives could go back to what it used to be. And there was a part of me that was very clear that I didn't want to go back to that life where I felt like I was a hamster, spinning and spinning the wheel in circles. And I almost saw it as an opportunity to reinvent my life and what I wanted to focus on. And at the first opportunity that I had, I started to go back to Costa Rica to just get in touch with the land. I was living in an apartment at the time, which is very unlike me. I was always living in homes and rooted to the ground. And experiencing COVID from an apartment was so disheartening in a way. And I remember going to Costa Rica and just being in the jungle and feeling so alive again. And there was a period of several years where I kept going to Costa Rica often. I mean, any opportunity. And it used to be that you would have to go to Bali and India and all kind Tibet to do all these things, but all of a sudden they're all in Costa Rica. You know, they're all happening there. And I remember coming back to my apartment and always feeling this amazing energy drain. You know, when I came back to my apartment, and mind you, I lived in a beautiful apartment. I had beautiful views of the Intracoastal Waterway and the ocean. I lived on a 30th floor. I was surrounded by my beautiful art. I had my balcony planted with at least 30 planters with all kinds of plants because I really missed being close to earth and the ground and plants. And I felt that energy drain. And I started to imagine all those people that live in little boxes in apartments surrounded by concrete all the time. And then we wonder why there's so much illness in the world and why hospitals are thriving and why there's so much disease because we've created a system where we design living conditions that are definitely not conducive to human health and human well-being. So I experienced that very, very deeply. And so as soon as I could, I sold my apartment and I went back to living in a home and surrounded by trees and it really makes a difference
Absolutely. Yeah.
to be surrounded by nature. That's why biophilic design and anything that we can do to connect us back to our roots, to how we evolved in nature. I think it's what the world needs to heal, really.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And you're doing that through your practice at the sacrifice of those luxury homes and projects, right? Like you
I
gave
I certainly hope to. I am being very discerning of projects that I take. And one of my recent initiatives, I created this coherence protocol, and it's something that hopes to be an alternative to traditional kickoff meetings. As a designer, you know that there's always a kickoff meeting where
yeah.
we have all the stakeholders of a project, and there's the landowners, land stewards, the operators, the architects, the landscape architects, the engineers, the owners, the all the stakeholders of a project. And it's usually very transactional. You know, it's very transactional and everybody goes about what their piece is and what they have to do. And it's sort of an evolution of the integrative process that sustainability calls for. And it just poses questions again as to the why. So you hopefully align here. Let me see if I can just, yes, it's to establish relational, ecological governance and financial coherence before design, entitlement, or capital deployment begins. And then part of the protocol is pondering upon the why, what's the vision of the project to get everyone aligned. And then I ask, especially the leaders of the project, to identify what is it about that land that called them? How do they feel in the land? And how it makes them feel, how it makes them connect. And then I do a series of meditations in the land. For example, one of them is a sensory analysis of the land where we are called to tune into each of our senses and experience the land with each of the senses. Another one is a meditation, which is the embodiment of other living beings and in the land. Like what are they calling for? What do they want to see emerge there? And then it's a process, hopefully, to allow people to connect with the land, not as a commodity, but as a co-creator and as something that is going to give them a sense of belonging, of being part of, and not just a commodity on which to impose or yes, our mental constructs.
Mm. Yeah, something it just struck me is just it's as if you're treating the site and the planet as the client in a lot of ways. Like that's where the listening
It,
starts.
it's interesting you say that, but I mean, I've done this a couple of times in Costa Rica, and it's been really powerful. And it's almost like you want to not just give a seat at the table to nature, to Mother Earth, to the place, to the story of place, to the ancestry of place, to the living system of place, but also you almost want to have Mother Gaia have a seat at the table, Mother Earth or Gaia have a seat at the table, and hopefully, eventually, for people to understand that she has the most important seat at the table, not just somebody that, hey, we should pay attention to her. No, no, she's the most important seat at the table. And how do we honor her in how we envision and go about creating projects? And land-based projects, I feel, are an extraordinary catalyst because as somebody that worked within the system for so many years and you feel that you made it happen in that system and it's very empowering. It's very difficult to go and tell people, the system doesn't work. You have to kind of step aside and try to see how you can contribute to creating a different system. But when you have a land-based project, it's a beautiful opportunity because you're starting in a way from scratch. You can create the the human architecture that you want, you can create the systems that you want, and through connection with the land, hopefully, you can facilitate the stewards of the project to understand that there needs to be a shift to be able to create a different paradigms as to how we develop in a way that doesn't extract and doesn't impose, but co-creates and regenerates.
Yeah, for sure. It's designing your practice and not just designing a thing or a space.
Yes. It's designing how we want to show up in the world in a way that is more coherent, in a way that is more contributing, in a way that you truly think about how you are being a part of something that is way larger than yourself or the project itself. In regenerative planning, there's this concept of the nested holes that you cannot really think of any development in of and of itself, that that development is going to have impact on the next hole that it's a part of, and that hole is going to have an impact on the greater whole. So it's all these nested holes that exist within a project that I think it's very revealing to take that into account, that it's not just about the project itself, but it's the ripple effect of that project across all its nested holes.
Absolutely. And it really shifts the paradigm on a lot of projects, because you're working within that whole. It's not just a thing, it's not just a project, and all of a sudden you have to prescribe maintenance and you have to make all these other things work for the project itself, but it's already embedded and already a part of that place in that way.
Yes. Absolutely. So you have like a new physical environment that you're intervening in. You can create the social architecture. You can create the economic incentives. You can create the leadership culture. So it really gives so many opportunities for transformation.
Incredible. I'm so inspired by this. And I'm also curious, like, who has inspired and influenced you most?
Okay, that's interesting. Well, I've had, as an architect, we're inspired by a lot of architects that came before us. But I think in this new path of regeneration, I want to acknowledge Robin Kimmerer and her book. braiding sweetgrass, who helped me deeply understand the flaws of our system and who helped me understand that there was other ways to coexist with Mother Earth. And it was very powerful because do you know Amanda Gorman's speech at Biden's inaugural, where she spoke so many heart-wrenching truths, but she said it through poetry? That's what Robin Bell Kimmerer does. You know, she makes us aware of these heart-wrenching truths of what colonization of these lands meant for the first peoples. And you feel this, you feel your heart sink with the responsibility of what we've just, what the system has destroyed. But she did it through poetry in a way that it gives us hope. So I would say that she is a great inspiration. Also, Buckminster Fuller, he said that we cannot change a system by fighting. We cannot change the existing reality by fighting against it. We create a new paradigm that makes the old one obsolete. And let me think. I love the Dalai Lama statement that the world will be saved by the hand of Western women because we're the first generation in millennia of women that have agency, that have been able to be involved in human affairs through a high price, but that has given us also financial freedom. And hey, I think that the leadership in sustainable design attests to the fact that we have a different sensitivity that could truly help transform the world. And I feel that it's our responsibility to contribute our little, grain of sand to making that happen.
Absolutely. Yeah, and for you, it might be poetry as a tool. For you, it's design as a tool. It's like,
Yes.
what's our best value that we have to offer and make the world
Yes.
a better
Yes.
place? Yeah.
No, another tool that we as designers, I feel, have cultivated is that ability to surrender to the unknown, to surrender to a process. And in regenerative practices, that is key because start with the premise that, yeah, it's true, the world is broken at so many levels, and that perhaps we don't have the answers at hand. We're not the experts of how that's going to come about, but we at least have the humility to acknowledge it and to perhaps curate the field of diverse expertise that can bring about change. And that takes a lot of courage because you have to surrender to something that is unknown. You have to go in uncharted waters. And we as designers do that many times. I remember in my tenure as a designer that sometimes I would be interviewed by clients that would tell me, no, no, I just want you to give me the hero sketch of what this is going to be. And I would tell them, but that's not how I work. It's about engaging in a process with the purpose and the context, and through the process the design emerges. And I feel that that's really at the core of regenerative practices, that we're not here as experts of how we're going to create a new paradigm, but we're simply facilitating the creation of a field that allows for that humility of surrendering to the unknown, to explore together and allow the genius of the collective really to emerge through dialogue and experience and being with the land and being with each other and formulating the mission and the vision for a project that is greater than the sum of the parts.
Yeah. It's incredible. It's allowing that design process to have its proper time and space versus, do this rendering, give me this thing, here's another deadline on top of another, like 3-minute space.
Absolutely. And I think, I think it's Walter that always says that and it all has to be inspired and directed by the land, no, as opposed to what we've been trained to think.
Yeah. Do you also feel like I feel like that's something that never came across in my education and, a lot more recently in my professional experience. Do you think that's like how do we change that? How do we change these systems aside from people like you who are leading in that way?
Well, I certainly hope that schools have changed. I see so many of the younger generations going to sustainability fields. And I mean, when I was in school in the 80s, there wasn't even a course on sustainable architecture, or the fact that they separate architecture from planning and landscape architecture. It's again that mentality of separation that is the opposite of holistic. And it's not only in our field, it's in every field. I mean, the medical field is so broken because everybody is focused on their specialty and they really fail to look at the holistic aspect of human beings and how we operate. And that breaking it up into specialization, I think it's a disservice to the fields that we're in service to. I certainly feel that that architecture schools have evolved since the 1980s to incorporate more curriculum on sustainable practices. And I didn't have any, which truly is, I think, in the late 1980s, I ponder upon how is that possible that you go to a top architecture school in the country and that they don't have requirements for you to understand systems that are more sustainable, and I, it was my intuition. I feel coming from Costa Rica. I remember when I first came to Boston, which is where I went to school for many years, and being in those buildings that were hermetically closed from the elements. And even though it was the dead of winter, I always felt claustrophobic. If I'm in a space where I can't open the window because of the way that I grew up, in San Jose, in the Central Valley, I was blessed with amazing temperature. If you were cold, you closed the window. If you were hot, you opened the window. So you were always in touch with the elements. And all of a sudden to be in these buildings that are completely closed off from the elements, and then to visit office buildings where people don't even have access to natural light. Uh, it just felt, it just made me feel not at the opposite of at ease. And then luckily I had the opportunity to travel to different cultures and to explore how they go about developing and building and understanding that there was different ways to do things, so that it's just to kind of uh, validate what I intuitively felt, that many of the practices were not in service to humanity or to our well-being or to the world.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's funny. It made me think about my experience in design school for 9 years. And first, academically, trying to pull from these different silos and like getting my sustainability studies and my environmental design minors and merging architecture and landscape, which many schools wanted to completely separate, which is I was like, I don't want to go to these places if they're not thinking about it all together. But then the irony of these spaces is they're the most uninspiring places in the world, and you're sitting at your desk designing all day completely detached from the world. And it's like, yeah, it's just never I feel like that's the newer way of thinking
Yeah.
of how to make our environments better at whatever capacity they might be and look like.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I guess looking into the next, let's say 5 or 10, I mean, ultimately millennia of years ahead of us, but in terms of the regenerative design
Mhm.
space,
Yeah.
what do you foresee in the future decade or so?
Well, I do see that there are places that are leading in a more regenerative approach to design, and there are places that are really lagging behind. I feel that if we as architects could be infused with a little bit of that indigenous wisdom of thinking about anything that we're going to do, to think about 7 generations before and 7 generations ahead, and to ensure that we leave the world a better place to future generations. I think that premise in and of itself would help raise the consciousness of planners, developers, architects at a level where they will be more discerning when they, start digging for the next big project of what legacy this project is really leaving for the world and if it's really contributing to leaving a better place for 7 generations ahead. I think I think that would really impact the the development world.
Absolutely. At a high level too. And also,
So, yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
not designing these things that are just kind of turn and burn and won't last.
Well, it's interesting because architects, and I mean, I was there for many years, so we think of a building and what is the completion of our work is when we get to take those pictures that are going to be published or that are going to be sent to the AIA for awards, as opposed to thinking about what field of energy is this place going to create for the people that are going to occupy it for years and years to come. You know, we're not trained to think of that. We're trained to think of the great picture that we're going to get to put in our portfolio and we're going to get to submit for publication and for awards and because that's how we've been trained. So I think that there has to be a complete shift from the objectification of buildings to the legacy of buildings, of what those spaces are going to generate in terms of consciousness, in terms of how it's going to impact the people that live there to leave a legacy of something that has to be long lasting and that is going to outlive us.
Yeah,
So,
definitely. It's funny, Olmsted just came to mind,
yes.
and what has been I've been thinking about this a lot lately, partially from working out of New York now, but just these parks that were designed years and years ago are still core to the culture of the place, and even to go back to the pandemic. I mean, Central Park was an amenity for everybody in the city. Everyone can have an outdoor space, and it's still functional, still valued societally.
It's still a treasure that everyone goes to. What a gift, right? What a gift. And then you think of the complete opposite of that, projects that raised entire ecosystems and created concrete malls and how what a disservice they've been to to society and to the world. There's a phrase that I like that architects like to do a lot of private jokes in public places. Um, and you see still to this day so many projects that they're I think monuments to perhaps egos of the developers and the architects. And even though they're very beautiful, I don't take away, but maybe maybe something like that is better as a sculpture, that is going to be admired as art, but to invest the billions and so many projects that come over budget by millions and billions of dollars just for that image, for that. I mean, I can think of examples like, for example, the Calatrava bird right in the middle of ground zero, right?
I was exactly thinking of that when you described that note.
That project, I mean, I have to do the research, but I know that it was billions of dollars over
Oh, yeah.
budget. And it doesn't really belong there, number one. I mean, it's a beautiful sculpture. I appreciate his skill and the beauty of the form, but to invest that amount of public funds in a building that now what houses is retail.
Yeah, it's a
It is
transit retail mall.
truly wow, like at least, throughout history, the community invested years and years and all the resources in creating the churches or the temples where people were going to gather for hopefully a purpose that was greater than profit and economic, advance. And now to have a sculptural building like that in a place where it really doesn't belong, to have spent billions of dollars over budget, and to then have retail inside it, it just to me is a disservice to society. Even though, it's wow, in the world of architecture, it's like what is it? An icon, a
Mm.
monument to what great architects can do. So I see that happening a lot still, which is unfortunate, because imagine how those resources could have been used, for example, to helping with the 17 sustainability goals, sustainable development goals, or helping across so many areas of society and the world that are in deep need of help and transformation.
Yeah, I mean, there's no shortage of money. It's the allocation, distribution decisions. It's also, I just experienced that space a month ago for the first time,
Okay.
and I hadn't been to New York in over a decade. It's been a long time, so I hadn't seen the 9/11 memorial. And my former boss had worked on it, designed it, and it was. I mean, that was such a powerful moment to.
Yes.
That was like, just all that trauma just like comes right back up. And I didn't even live there and experience the depths of it, but
Yes.
just having that moment and then having this other separate piece of architecture, it's like, you, you know, it's beautiful and lovely, but it's not really necessary.
Yes.
And you still have that powerful moment.
Yes.
So,
And it's funny that you mentioned, because we're talking about Ground Zero in New York, and I remember when Arad is his name, who won the competition for the two pools, the
yeah.
two pools. And I remember that I felt that it was so amazing, that it was so beautiful. And when it opened, I went to see it. I think it was 2000 and when was it? 2015,
Probably
2014 it was,
14. Yeah.
I think. And now that I recently visited it again, I felt like, wow, what a missed opportunity. We're using natural elements like water and planting all these trees in a grid around it, right? To pay tribute to what was there, instead of using all that area to create, I don't know, a garden that is more of an ode to nature. I don't know. I felt like, you know, af seeing it for the first time in 2014, and seeing it, I think it was last year that I was there, 10 years later, and having gone through this regenerative process myself, when I was so moved and full of admiration for the project back in 2015, to see it with a regenerative lens, it felt like a missed opportunity, that we were again being strict to the grid of the towers and the grid of the trees that are planted in a grid, instead of doing something completely opposite to show the power of nature. You know what I'm saying? To
Mm.
to to perhaps capture in that space in the middle of New York, uh, a moment of natural expression, as opposed to, again, our same mentality that created the Twin Towers and the trauma of its destruction, but still encapsulating that same vision, but with natural elements. Do you see what I'm saying? It was like,
Yeah.
it was like, I could see my evolution in how I perceived it the first time that I saw it, and how I perceived it last year when I visited it again. So,
Yeah. No, it's interesting kind of how we evolve as
yeah.
humans and spaces. Granted, the trees are growing, there's seasons, there's, all these
Yes.
different changes, but ultimately it's a little bit trapped in time. And so,
Hmm.
and thinking 7 generations ahead,
Hmm.
that space ultimately is probably going to be the same, right? There's not this other layer on top of it
Right.
in terms of like the human resilience or new experiences. It's just That's what that is. It's
Yeah.
fascinating. Yeah. Have there been other landscape spaces that you've experienced in that way where you've had kind of your previous lens and your current lens?
Oh, interesting. Well, that one was just very striking, and it was last year, and I sat there remembering the the me from 10 years ago, how it was so, and then to feeling kind of the missed opportunity of encapsulating the sort of the systemic, squares and grids of the trees. But I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I've first visited and was like in awe of the architecture, and then I felt well, well, I don't know if you know about the complex. It's downtown Miami, where it has a library and it has what used to be the Miami Museum of Art, but since then moved to the PAM. It's three buildings, and they occupy several blocks in downtown Miami. And I remember when I first visited, the block is completely contained by this wall, kind of like a fortress. And then you go through these very, very sort of theatrical stairs that you go up to it, and then you end up in this court where the three buildings are. And I remember when I first moved to Miami and I experienced that project, and it was like, wow, I think it was, who's the architect? I want to say, I forgot, but don't quote me on this. Maybe Robert Stern, but I'm not 100% sure. I can't remember. But I remember going to see it when I first moved to Miami 30 years ago. Oh, what a great piece of architecture. And then recently, when I was in the neighborhood, because I had to go to one of the government buildings there, and I noticed how this is so pedestrian intrusive, because you walk around that and it's just this big wall that has no permeability to creating a sense of community around the project. It's just like closed off and very fortress like. And I'm like, wow, like it like when what we're trained to appreciate is great architecture, and what really is architecture and design for creating place where community can thrive, where humans can thrive, is two different things. So that's another that I recently visited, and I was like, wow, how did I think this was such good architecture back then?
Yeah. Well, I think it also goes back to your earlier point of impact, which also for me was my transition between my architectural education and getting into landscape architecture is it's not just the users of the building. It's not, and yes, that's very important. But at the same time, there's so much more out there and there's so much
It's
more.
the ripple effect and how you make that which you're creating part of a greater community. Again, the concept of the nested holes, how it impacts the entire neighborhood. And I visit a lot of places in Miami where I can't understand how they conceive of these spaces that are completely closed off from the elements, completely enclosed, like malls, like buildings. For example, there's I don't know if it changed owners, but it was the Espiritu Santo building, which is this beautiful arch in the storefront. And I remember, I think it was 2010 that there was an AIA convention, and I took a tour to go see architectural monuments, and I went and saw that building. But even back then, this is 2010, and I'm not the regenerative Jaya that I am now. But I remember, because it has a whole atrium facing the water, which is hermetically closed, okay? Which cannot be open. And it has apartments with balconies facing that atrium with that glass that is preventing the winds from the bay to 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 caress all of those inhabitants of those apartments in their balconies. And it was very stuffy, I remember, and felt like, and I thought, oh my God, the cost to just cool this space when they could just have opened it up and allowed the wind to do its part. It was just, and this is back in 2010. I mean, I haven't been to the building since, but I felt very strongly that it was a disservice to what what the elements call for. When you're facing the water, how do you create a greenhouse effect with balconies into that closed space that has to be cooled all the time? It just didn't make any sense. What
Yeah.
the architects do sometimes, it's almost laughable.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad as the licensed architect, you're the one who said it, not me. But it's funny that the thing I had always heard in school is the difference between architecture and landscape architecture
Yes.
is architecture. You're keeping it all comes down to water. I think it's more than that, but in the water story, architecture's keeping it out, and landscape's letting it in.
How beautiful. Imagine if we could conceive of architecture that that coexists with the water, with the water coming in, with water coming out,
The
with
airflows.
elevating airflows. But I think yeah, I don't think that building would be built today. I think we've come at least that far.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess, Haya, just any parting words? Something I always like to ask is, what advice would you have to others in our designer and builder community, or to a younger version of Haya?
Okay. To a younger version of me, certainly it would have been uh, to connect with my intrinsic value as opposed to trying so hard to follow the rules and of the systems that I was a part of, to feel validated, especially as a woman architect. And to the younger generations emerging, I would encourage them to focus on the why of what they're doing and to be discerning as to what they choose to be in service of, to ensure that there's an alignment of values and principles, because otherwise we really easily get sucked into the system.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that inspiration. I hope everyone really carries that with them and considers their own role in our community and our profession. So, how can people best connect with you? How do they find you?
Oh, they can email me, Jaya, Jaya, at kzarchitecture.com. And I am now in the process of building my new website, because in 20, let's see, yeah, like about in 2018, 2019, I started this arm of KZ Architecture, which was Regen Design Lab, which is the one that venture to do all those projects for impact. And it's interesting because after going through this journey of regenerating myself, what I realize is that Regen Design Lab, it's not solely about designing buildings, but participating in designing anything that would support human evolution so that we can leave the world in a better place than we found it.
It's absolutely beautiful, and one of my life goals that I share with you as well. So, thank you for so eloquently speaking on it and sharing, your experience with regenerative design. You're doing truly incredible work. So, thank you for that. Yeah,
Thank you
thank you
for
for your
the
time.
opportunity. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Haya.
It's lovely to see you.
You too.